Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping on our virtual helmets and diving straight into a really critical topic in database security.
Yeah, this one's a big deal.
We got a rapid request to unpack a major news security bulletin from Microsoft SQL Server. So if you manage databases, or really if your organization relies on any sensitive data, you need to listen in.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to do let's say, a surgical dissection of CVE 2026-20803. I know these names are just alphabet soup sometimes, but the technical details here,
Right.
and more importantly, the potential impact, they're just profound.
Right. We've pulled together all the analysis, and it all centers on an elevation of privilege flaw. The big takeaway, really, before we even get into the weeds, is that patches were released on January 13th, 2026.
And for good reason. This flaw lets an authorized attacker get substantially elevated system privileges. They can do it remotely, and it completely bypasses some of the built-in authentication checks.
So we're talking about an attacker who's already inside the gate.
Exactly, and this vulnerability lets them cross that final critical security boundary. You go from a basic compromise to a catastrophic control scenario very, very quickly.
Okay, let's define the perimeter then. For everyone listening and trying to assess their risk right now, what are we actually dealing with, and how severe is Microsoft officially calling this?
Officially, it's classified as important severity. Now, for folks who track CVSS scores, it comes in at a 7.2.
7.2. Okay, that's firmly in the high tier.
It is, but you have to remember, CVSS scores are about technicals, not just ultimate impact. And the crucial part here is the attack vector is network.
Which means they don't need to be sitting at a console.
Not at all. The attack can come from anywhere over the network as long as they can reach that SQL instance.
That 7.2 reading is already alarming, but network accessible. That just accelerates the whole risk profile. So who's threatened? Are we talking about old legacy systems or?
No, and that's what really heightens the urgency here. This is a flaw impacting modern infrastructure. Specifically, it affects SQL Server 2022 and the brand new, just released SQL Server 2025.
Wow. Okay, so if you've deployed either of those, this patch needs to be at the top of your list. These are the systems running mission-critical stuff right now.
Exactly.
Right, let's unpack the mechanism. This is the core insight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is this happening? What's the root cause that lets this privilege escalation even work?
It's rooted in a really fundamental design weakness. It's categorized under CVE-2026.
Okay, CVE-2026. In plain English, what does that actually mean in the context of a database?
It means there's missing authentication for a critical function. So think about it like this. You log into SQL Server, you authenticate, even with high privileges.
Right.
But you're interacting with let's call it the external surface of the database. Deep inside that engine, there are these kernel-level functions that manage memory, system resources, the real guts of the operation. Those functions should always have their own dedicated, explicit check. It shouldn't matter who is calling them.
So the architectural flaw is that the system trusts you too much after the first login. It assumes since you're already in and have high privileges, any deeper calls you make must be legit.
Precisely. It's a bit of a legacy way of thinking. This flaw weaponizes that assumption. It lets an authenticated user, someone with a trusted role like debowner, escalate their access way beyond that role. They effectively break out of the application boundary and get system-level control.
And they do it without needing another password or anything.
No user interaction needed.
This is a really important distinction for everyone listening. This isn't for some random anonymous attacker. They have to have logged in first, which points directly to an insider threat or, maybe more realistically, a post-initial compromise scenario.
That's why the nuance here is so important. The attack requires high privileges to begin with, plus network access. And because of that precondition, Microsoft's initial exportability assessment was less likely. Less likely. I want to push back on that for a second, because for a security professional, doesn't that precondition that the attacker is already an authorized user actually make it more serious in some ways?
You're hitting the nail on the head. Less likely is purely about the difficulty of getting those initial credentials. But in the modern world, attackers get those credentials all the time through phishing, lateral movement, you name it.
So you can imagine a scenario where, say, a developer's machine is compromised and it has saved credentials for a service account.
Or a web app gets popped and it has a high privilege connection string. In that situation, this CDE becomes the ultimate launchpad. An attacker goes from being able to, read some tables to a full system takeover.
It turns a small fire into a massive one.
It absolutely does. And that's why it's so serious, even if there aren't reports of it being exploited in the wild yet. The potential is just too high to ignore. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a bit scary. Let's talk about the true impact. What can an attacker actually do once they pull this off?
Hmm.
Because a 7.2 score doesn't really scream catastrophe, but this sounds like it is.
The capabilities they gain are, well, they're extraordinary. Once they break out of that user security context, they get abilities normally reserved for forensic tools. The ultimate prize here is gaining debugging privileges over the entire SQL Server process.
Debugging privileges. So they can basically attach to the process, pause it, and just look at everything.
Everything. They can inspect every variable, every piece of memory, and that lets them dump sensitive memory contents from the skillserver.exe process and memory. That's where all the secrets live, unencrypted.
What kind of secrets are we talking about here? When you dump memory from a live SQL server, what are you getting?
You're getting the keys to the kingdom. I mean, your data might be encrypted on disk, but when it's being used, it's often sitting in memory in plain text, so an attacker could pull out.
Let me guess. Credentials.
Oh, yeah. Unencrypted database credentials, active session tokens, service account passwords, you name it. They could also grab the actual encryption keys for TDE or column-level encryption while they're in use.
So all the protections a company thinks they have, like transparent data encryption, they become meaningless.
Completely meaningless. The attacker doesn't need to break the encryption. They just steal the key right out of memory.
It's like they skip picking the lock on the front door and just steal the master key from the security office.
That's the perfect analogy. They go from having high access to having high impact capabilities. They can steal the very mechanism protecting all the data, and that's why the risk is so critical.
That makes the urgency absolute. Okay, so let's get to the fix. What does this mean for admins and DBAs right now? We need the specific patches Microsoft released on January 13th.
Right. So the updates came out through two paths, which is typical for Microsoft: the General Distribution Release, or GDR, and the Cumulative Update, or CU.
Can you just quickly break down the difference there? GDR versus CU?
Sure. A cumulative update, CU, is the big one. It bundles all the previous bug fixes, performance tweaks, and security patches. It's more to test, but it brings you fully up to date. The General Distribution Release, GDR, is more like a surgical strike. It's a smaller patch that fixes only the security vulnerability.
So it's lower risk to apply, which is probably what you want for a critical, high availability system.
Exactly. It's the just fix the security hole fast option.
Got it. So with that in mind, what are the specific build numbers people need to look for to secure SQL Server 2022?
For SQL Server 2022, you have two options depending on your strategy. You can apply CU22, which is build 16.0.4230.2. That's the full cumulative path. Or you can apply the security-only RTM GDR, which is build 16.1165.1.
And for the early adopters, the people already on SQL Server 2025.
For SQL Server 2025, you need to install the January GDR update. The build number for that one is 17.0.1050.2. Those are the non-negotiable builds that fix this vulnerability.
Beyond just patching, did Microsoft give any other advice, for orgs that might have a delay because of testing cycles?
They did, and it's pretty standard good advice. First, prioritize your highest risk systems. That means anything internet-facing or any server that's handling your most sensitive data. Patch those immediately.
Makes sense.
And second, while you're waiting to patch, lock things down. Review who has admin access. Actively restrict administrative privileges to the bare minimum number of people. The fewer accounts that have the high privileges needed for this attack, the smaller your attack surface.
All right, so patch ASAP, but while you're scheduling it, do a quick audit and lock down any excessive admin rights.
It's a pragmatic and necessary defense-in-depth strategy.
Okay, let's do a quick recap of this deep dive on CVE 2026-20803. It's a major elevation of privilege flaw in SQL Server 2022 and 2025.
It's rooted in that architectural weakness, CVE-2026, basically missing an authentication check for an internal function.
The attacker needs to be an authenticated high-privilege user to start, but once they exploit it, they can get debugging rights, dump memory, and steal the keys to the Kingdom encryption keys, credentials, you name it.
And the specific fixes, the build numbers, were released on January 13th, 2026.
That covers the essentials. This is the core issue here, is that architectural oversight, that implicit trust.
Mm-hmm.
It raises a bigger question that goes way beyond just SQL Server.
It really does. This vulnerability is a huge blinking sign for the security principle we call zero trust.
How so? How does that apply here?
Well, the design failed because it trusted the user's initial login. It created a trusted boundary. The question this forces us to ask is, when you're designing any system, a database, a cloud service, whatever, are you making sure that every single truly critical function, the ones that can read memory or change configs,
Requires its own separate, non-bypassable authentication check.
exactly, even if the user is already logged in, that's zero trust in a nutshell. Don't trust, always verify, especially for the powerful stuff.
So that shift from just securing the perimeter to requiring authentication for every critical action deep inside the system, that's the real lesson here. Implicit trust is just a vulnerability waiting for an exploit.
A vital lesson for anyone building or auditing a system today.
Wise words to end on. Thank you for joining us on this critical deep dive. We'll see you next time.